During the Middle Ages, magic was a part of everyday life. The medieval people lived in a world of chaos and unpredictability that led to superstition, where fairies, spirits, witches, or even the vegetable lamb of Tartary were all considered quite real and could affect a person's life in many different ways. Not just these mythical creatures, but normal household objects, you or your neighbors, could be magical. People would look for answers for their daily problems in magic, trying to make sense of why things happened. This created a sort of business market around magic in which people could profit off of performing magical rituals or creating a supernatural solution for someone's troubles. Attentive and cunning folk of the time could make a trade and live off of these superstitions. In medieval times, if you had a problem that may need magical fixing, then you would most likely be going to visit a wise woman for help. These women were most likely to be a midwife, a healer, or a self-proclaimed Wiccan or witch. And these women had a shared knowledge and practice of what was basically pre-medical science, and it was learned and passed down through generations. There is a paradoxical relationship in European history surrounding magic, Christianity, and capitalism. But I do not have the time or really the capacity to dive into its complexity for this video. However, I will try my best to explain the effect this relationship had on the women of the time. It's easy to think that the medieval people were daft, gullible, or naive, but magical thinking creates a distinct culture. People who believe in magic are going to act and live differently than those who do not. In a sense, magical thinking is the refusal of explanation or reason. When dealing with magic, asking how something works is asking the wrong question. This sort of thinking or lifestyle is the opposite of what early capitalist and Christian Europe wanted from its subjects. From the 12th to 16th centuries, mercantile capitalism was a significant economic power in Europe, and in order for this capital power to flourish, European subjects needed to start working for other people, making their already rich employers richer while doing all the work, with the ideal capitalist mindset of transforming life into the capacity to work. With the arrival of Christianity, magic started to see a strict ban with the threat of punishment from capital power to ensure its suppression. In order to build this new society, magical thinking needed to be broken apart. This meant that one of the few powers women had at the time, the passage of physical and magical knowledge, went against the capital thought process, and thus arose the witch hunts. A good wife in this new society would have been someone who was chaste, quiet, would stay at home and upkeep the house, let the husband have a job or a career, but most importantly, to have children, so that these children can grow up, go out, and work. These newly encouraged social norms created violent accusations on the women at the time. There is now a tie between placing women in a strictly reproductive role in society and the witchcraft charges of sexually cavorting with the devil, sacrificing babies, and thus gaining powers from hell. The people of that time thought ordinary women could become witches who were corrupt and evil, and that their wives, daughters, mothers, or sisters could become witches, tainted by the devil's seed. The devil represents the opposite of a quote-unquote good husband, who witches would willingly give themselves over to. If a woman had exchanged her virtue with the devil for hellish powers, it would have meant that she entered a pact with him and was now one of his followers. This mass hysteria led to abundant different ways women could be accused of witchcraft. The best example is, now a classic symbol of a witch, their broomstick. Because people thought that normal household objects could possibly be magical, the broomstick became a twisted symbol of women, and this mundane object could be turned back on them in horrifying ways. It was believed that witches would sacrifice babies to the devil, and then boil their bones, creating a grease-like substance that was rubbed onto the broomsticks to make them fly. When witches were actually accused and arrested, there was almost nothing that could be said or done that could convince her accusers of her innocence. The people who would be arresting witches would have been just as scared of the witch as she would be of them, as they thought she belonged to the devil. They couldn't touch her tainted body or let her speak evil spells. It was common that the arresters would wear consecrated salt on their body, and they would be wrapped in linens with prayers written on them. The arrest and trial would be violent. Witches' hands would be bound away from one another, and she would be laid down on a plank, because if she could lay on the earth's surface, she could summon powers up from hell. Her powers would then need to be neutralized, so she would have been cut to bleed out the taint. She would have been interrogated, and in some countries like Scotland, could have been tortured, as her interrogators would be looking for common witchcraft practices, the devil's secrets, and who any other conspiring witches may be. If another witch named you as a fellow, then it would be enough to convict you to her same fate. Because the people of the time believed witches to be demonic, she would have been quite resistant to pain. When interrogated, witches would be forced to wear a skull's bridle that would have prongs around the chin and mouth. Finger clamps and fire-hot piercers would be put to their skin. They could also be hanged with their arms in an unnatural position behind their back, usually dislocating or even breaking their shoulders. One of the most famous witches from history is Agnes Sampson. She was a known healer and midwife. She was accused of using witchcraft to assassinate King James VI of Scotland and his new bride, Anne of Denmark, who was the daughter of King of Denmark, Norway. On the newlyweds' return voyage to Scotland, they were set upon by dangerous sea storms that almost killed them. Agnes was named by another accused witch, Galus Duncan, during interrogation. There was a devil mark found on Agnes's body, a direct indication that Agnes was in cohorts with the devil, condemning her to death. Agnes was found guilty the day after her torture and was sentenced to death by fire. She burned on a hill outside Edinburgh. It was believed that cremation destroys physical bodies, meaning on Judgment Day, cremated witches would not have a physical body to rise up and meet their God. The last execution of a witch in Britain was in the year 1727, and only 26 years later, in 1756, did the state recognize that magic is a fantasy, and that witchcraft was no longer a criminal offense. At that point, more than 40,000 people had been executed for witchcraft across Europe. But some remnant of the witch's power remains. With Agnes Sampson as an inspiration, Shakespeare wrote the witches of Macbeth, women who represent the dark powers that have the capacity to influence men's decisions. And recently there has been a resurgence of witches in pulp culture, with witches becoming some of the most beloved characters of pulp culture's favorite stories. Some of my favorites date back almost 100 years, with The Wizard of Oz, Narnia, The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, The Lord of the Rings, Kiki's Delivery Service, Outlander, Hocus Pocus, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, Harry Potter, The Discovery of Witches, The School of Good and Evil. I think women of this day and age understand what witches really represent, that they're powerful creatures with the capacity to change the understanding of the world. A space has been created for such a hated and hunted creature, and she has finally been embraced.